William Harris, motion to approve.
Been moved to approve by Harris,
I'll second.
seconded by Schneck. Any questions, discussions, additions? If not, all those in favor of approval of minutes will signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. That motion carries. We will now move on to review community survey, survey questions and logistics. Eric, if you'd like to reappear.
Greetings, can you hear me?
Yes?
Okay, so John, if I'm not mistaken, we have about a half an hour, right? I just want to make sure.
The half hour was your limit due to April. So we have
Right.
as much time as you need.
Okay, and unfortunately, April cannot be here tonight because it's a long story. She thought that she was going to be able to join us for the first half hour, but it turns out that her work commitment didn't allow that. So you got me tonight. So I wanted to give you a quick update on where we are. We're really in the thick of the survey editing and testing and making sure that it ends up being the instrument that we all hope it can be. Now we are unfortunately about one draft behind because I thought by this time we would have had all of the feedback from the task force, but we were able to get some of that, but not all of it. So tonight, if there's any additional task force feedback, that would be terrific. That's not setting us too far back because essentially I was able to conduct a couple of test or pilot survey groups, focus groups yesterday, which was part of the plan. And essentially we're just combining all of the changes that we are going to make as a result of some of that testing, along with any changes that the task force has tonight, and just try to, pump out the new draft, the latest draft of a new survey or the new iteration tomorrow or by the end of day tomorrow. That's our goal. I did receive, just so everybody knows that I did receive it, and we're incorporating that, some feedback and suggestions from Pat, John, and William, and those changes are being incorporated and or we're at least addressing them in some way. We had two really terrific focus groups yesterday. Both John helped to connect me with Laura Yari and Attic and some folks. So we had some folks in treatment and recovery take this survey and have a focus group. And then Chief Bliven was kind enough to get about 6 officers and detectives organized, and we did a focus group with them yesterday. And both were extremely valuable, very insightful, very helpful. Very glad that we did that. And as a result, we have a number of significant changes that we're already starting to implement. We took your advice, and I say yours, but it was sort of a group that met, the research team, I guess it was a couple weeks ago now, that rather than try to roll out an online and paper survey at different dates, which we had originally intended, we are going to roll it all out at once. And in fact, we're going to be sending out the bulk of the surveys via snail mail. We've had a lot of discussion about this and feel like that is probably our most cost-effective way to get the most surveys out in a random and achieve a random sample and reasonably representative sample. So we'll send out somewhere from between 5,000 and 7,000 surveys, paper surveys. They will also have an online link so people can take it online. They don't have to send the survey back. It will be returned, postage paid return envelope, and we're hoping for about at least a 20% return rate. On top of that, we'll be having the surveys available and doing some marketing online so that, all in all, we're going to get well over the 1,000 to 1,100 surveys that we need to have a reasonably high level of confidence in our statistics. So, we feel pretty good about that plan. And we're going to have a version of it translated both paper and online in Hmong and in Spanish. I've got pretty much everything lined up and ready to go. The translators are ready to go. They're just waiting for the final draft. Our graphic designer is ready to go to make sure that we have an easy to read and take survey. We're now just waiting to, make all of the final edits and changes to the survey. But I want to make sure that we get it right. That, you are, the task force in particular is happy with the instrument. And one thing we're going to be doing as we start to move towards a final document is create kind of a version of the survey that's going to explain why we are asking each of the questions. And we want to make this available online so ultimately anybody can go to, for example, our website, click on the survey, and we'll have an explanation for why each question is asked, what we hope to gain from it, so that whether it's the general public or you can have confidence as to why each question is on there, the rationale. You can use it to explain to people, because there are definitely a few questions on there that in our focus groups raised a couple eyebrows, and we can talk about those. So I think having an explanation actually really helps those groups understand, okay, I understand now why you're asking these questions.
Eric, what
So
were those questions that raised?
Yeah, I'll just give the one that probably raised the most eyebrows, which was the question about people's sexuality. And one of the reasons, why we asked that question, if you recall, is we wanted to make sure that we were able to correlate certain things like how people perceive police and how people perceive police taking issues seriously based on a number of demographic factors, whether it's race, ethnicity, and sexual preference was one of the things that I think some of the task force members thought was really critical. And actually, when we were doing the Wausau Police pilot task force that Ben helped organize, I don't remember her name, Ben. I sincerely apologize. It was the officer who's the victim's, what's her title? I've even forgotten her. Yes, Sarah. When some of the other officers questioned that question, she kind of said, well, I just want everybody to know that domestic violence among gay couples is actually extremely high. We see this quite frequently. So she was basically advocating that we keep that question on there. And once we were able to explain why we were asking that, we didn't have any other concern. I mean, the concerns were allayed, I guess I'll say. So that was one example. There are others, but I don't, unless you want to go into more. So at this point, what I'm wondering is, do you guys have questions, whether it's about where we are in the process? Do you want to go through some specific questions on the survey that you'd like to give feedback on, or are you interested in talking about plans to disseminate the survey? Whatever the task force would like to do, that's what I'm willing to do today.
Well, let's frame it first. Did the draft survey capture all of the areas that you thought we should be asking questions about? Or did we?
I'm sorry. Who are you directing that question to, John? I'm sorry.
To the task force, to the task.
Thank you.
I think it's a very inclusive. I think it's a good span of questions. I guess, Eric, my question for you would be, when people have done it, what's the time commitment? Have you timed that out? Do we know? I mean, it's pretty daunting when you look, it's 21 pages. And so are we in an appropriate time for responses?
I'm going to be honest. It's Mike, right? I can see who's talking. Mike, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm going to be honest. We don't know exactly how long it is, and I'm not that concerned about it right this second, and I'll tell you why. Because we feel like we really are still in heavy edit mode, and so when people took the survey, I specifically didn't want them to worry about the time it was taking, because I was more interested in their reaction to the content. if we just go by the Qualtrics analysis, they do kind of, research around types of questions and what they think the average time would be. The draft that you guys have in front of you, unaltered, said it was about a 15-minute survey, and we'd like to cut that down by at least 3 minutes. But I'm not, I'm not worried about that because I think we'll get there. I just feel like we want to make sure that we are asking the right questions and that once we've got that set of questions worded the way we want, then we can go in and say, all right, this is going to take how long, and therefore we cut it down by X amount. I know that's probably not a hugely satisfactory answer, but I don't think we're quite ready to tell or announce how long it is just yet, or how long it will take.
I have a question.
Go ahead,
So,
Will.
that question that he mentioned, that he put in there in terms of sexuality, I think it is important to have a question there in terms of making sure, because domestic abuse amongst gay couples and others is important to deal with. But I did mention, because I did email him, that I thought maybe the question might be worded in terms of how do you identify as heterosexual, homosexual, or other, because I just was worried that the way in which it was worded, a lot of people in the LGBTQ community don't want to be identified just only by the sex that they have, which is the feeling that they get in terms of how people see them. So I think it's important to identify who's taking the survey for those purposes, but I was wondering if maybe, getting other opinions, if it should be worded in that way in terms of how you identify as LGBTQ, heterosexual, or other, and that might be a little less, maybe a little less, came off to me a little abrasive in terms of mentioning your sex life. I don't know, what are other thoughts?
Are you asking me, William, or are you asking the entire group?
I guess I'm asking the entire group, and you as well.
I guess my response to that is we're looking for disparities. And the only way you can sometimes find out if there are disparities or concerns is to ask some uncomfortable questions. So again, in the preface or the intro, they say you don't have to answer questions. But I think that if there are concerns about certain portions of the community not feeling the same as the rest of the community, we need to know that, and one of the ways you do that is asking that question. So I don't know what your thoughts are of others.
I think that I appreciate the comments, because when I'm reading this, I think for some that it is a confusing response. I think statistically though, right, when we get to the analysis, we can, do some combinations and sort of narrow it down. I've read it a couple times and I trip up on it. And so I can appreciate that some editing. The other thing, Eric, I'm wondering, are the numbers going to stay that are beside the responses on the actual survey, or are we going to remove those? Because I have concern then of a ranking feel for those who are answering and some bias that would come out from that.
Yeah, the last question is the easiest to answer. Those numbers are just, unfortunately, a little bit of a what do you call it? A holdover from a download from Qualtrics. That's not seen by anybody. It's just, unfortunately, I just didn't, when I sent that to you, I just didn't have time to delete those. So no, that will look very different. They won't see any numbers or ranking or anything like that. Would it be possible for me to share my screen with you? Would you be able to see that if I do? I don't know if our tech people can you see this document?
Yes.
I wanted to show you, and this is actually just, so it gets to your first question, Mike, and a little bit to Will's point. When we were, testing this with our two focus groups, the comment about the question seems not only a little responses seem not only a little overly complicated, but may cause people to question whether they want to answer. So we actually shortened it. So can you see D5 for the moment?
Yeah.
Now, this doesn't necessarily mean we've got it correct. Like your suggestion of maybe even lumping it a little together even more, like maybe LGBTQ plus in one category, heterosexual, and then other. We could certainly do that, but I wanted to show you what we had done, at least in the immediate changes. But we're open to, different viewpoints, especially if we can talk with some members of the LGBT community and ask, what do you feel about this? Are you comfortable with this or not? So we're definitely open to changing this.
Yeah, I would say we should get the opinions of the LGBTQ community, because my fear is just, the whole point of it is that we want people to answer, and I don't want people to look at that question, in the LGBTQ community and not want to answer it because of the way it's worded. Because we want to be very representative. So I think that would be a good idea, just making sure in terms of what people would feel comfortable with and answering, so that we make sure that we are getting a broad representation.
So I'll definitely work on that, and if anyone also is interested in sounding out connections, please do and get back to us, but we'll also follow up with that.
Other questions?
Yes, so, other question that I had was, in the, I think, arrest 2 section, let me just go back to the,
Yes.
I mentioned that, because the question was, like, do you, we're answering, like, are you satisfied? And I just don't know if people that have been arrested are going to say I was satisfied with being arrested. So I thought that maybe we should probably, I thought that I think arrest 1 gets at what we would want to know from that situation, which was, let me kind of go back, sorry, I'm flipping back and forth.
Yeah, were you treated with respect?
Yeah, we're treated with respect, that kind of thing. So that is just sort of my thoughts on that, and I don't know, I could go either way in terms of the, kind of say inclusion about the being pulled over, but that's probably less so.
I have no problem with it. In fact, that was, we got to have a little humor here. In the focus groups, there are a couple questions that we, had in there, and the focus group respondents helped us understand that some of the questions, if you really look at it, were just a little absurd, at least the responses. And I think this kind of starts to fit in that category. Yeah, I don't know how people are going to claim to be satisfied after being arrested. So I think we would agree with you on that.
Okay, and then, and this one is one, I'm not really sure, I guess I want to open up it to the group to ask if they think this is redundant or not. D9 and D10, are you religious, and then are you an active member of a religious community? Usually, I don't know, to me, there's a difference if we're talking about spiritual versus religious. If you're religious, that usually means to me you're within a community, a religious community, or go to some church or something. But I don't, open up to the group if they feel that it's not redundant and that's sort of as is. I mean, it's a small point, it could stay in, I could do with or without it, but I just wanted to mention to see what other people thought.
What are we hoping to gather with the 2 questions?
Well, I think at least one, oh, go ahead, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Eric's.
We'd like to, Sorry, if you're asking me what I think, our survey team would like to remove those two questions because we know we need to shorten it and we're not sure what value that's going to add for you. But if you want it, we'll obviously put it back, we'll leave it.
So I think sociologically, when you look at studies of groups of people, there's a difference between being religious and being active. Because of people who go to church, that's a different social group than those who are religious. And we get tripped up. The average citizen, spirituality and religiosity are the same for them. Whereas we can argue about it and say, so often you see what their self-reflection is and then what their behavior is around it, asked in a social poll or in social policy type interviews. So that's probably where it stems from. Just my 2 cents.
Is there, Mike, is there?
I would argue that I don't think I would side with Eric's group, that I don't understand why we would necessarily go down that, because it's not a typically identified area of concern. I think because we're not asking what their faith practices are, we're just in a broad spectrum, and I don't think that's in question with procedures and interactions and stuff. That's just from me. So I don't see a reason for them there, and I think it is a duplication, I think, for many.
I would agree.
I think you heard you can remove them.
Great. I have one question for you guys, and I'm not trying to hijack it if you have other questions. The question came up during the group of police officers and detectives who with the focus group we did yesterday, and the question around the conditional question. So towards the end of the survey, I guess it was question. It's called 911 call. I'm not 100% sure what page it's on. It's around page like 16, 17, or 18.
There are several of them.
Right.
They're on page 12, 12 of 19.
Okay. So the issue that came up and was pointed out, which, just speaks to my own lay perspective, is that 911 and dispatch is not part of the Wausau Police. And so the question that was raised, is this something that is within the purview of the survey, meaning you want to know this? Because the police have no control only over 911. But on the other hand, you may decide that you still want a 911 question because, most people still associate 911 with, with the police. So I guess it's a question I have for you guys.
If you look at my edits that I forwarded on, I deleted the reference to the Wausau Police. In most cases, because it is a county dispatch. But that is a critical gatekeeper to the system. And it is a failure, and the failure comes out of the fact that we're not transmitting the message clearly or communicating it clearly at the point of entry with that gatekeeper. We get problems later in it. So I would want at least one question relative to 911, even though it is not a city function. But I don't.
Okay. Thank you.
Personally, but I don't know what others think.
I also think it's, you also have the non-emergency number, that there's contact that happens. And so when you look, and I was going to write to you, Eric, under D questions, you talk about, and the demographics, you talk about contact, and you talk about stopped or pulled over, but you don't use the phrase contact. But then earlier in the survey, you use the phrase of contact. You put that in there, so I think at some point an editor going through just to clarify, are we going to use those three terms consistently through that? But I think 911, people don't understand. I mean, I don't think a community member is going to get the difference, but I also don't know about with the non-emergency number, is there a different set, is that a different interaction that we want to inquire about?
Ben, I would defer to you.
I'm not sure how you differentiate in a survey between 911 and a non-emergency call to our department, or even 911 versus a non-emergency call to the dispatch center. So I think that's one thing. So I'm not sure how you differentiate. Maybe you can, maybe the survey experts can tell us that. But I do agree that there's value in hearing from people how they feel when they call 911. Because we do get complaints about, hey, I called 911 and X, Y, or Z happened, and so I'm not going to call again, or they're feeling discouraged from calling, and that's something that impacts our ability to serve the community. So I think there is value in getting that information. Maybe we have a board supervisor here speaking on behalf of the county. Well, we have two. That's right. But I also think we don't oversee the dispatch center, so there's we have influence, I think, over that information that comes back, but we would defer to the sheriff's office, who oversees the dispatch center, and how to manage some of the information we're getting back on the survey.
So the differentiation may not be managed.
Or do we need to add both? Did you call 911 or the non-emergency number? Because then it's a self-initiation. Because in the police department, they pulled you over, they stopped you. They're the ones who are taking the active step. Versus I reached out to the police department. And so if you ask me, have I called 911 in the last whatever, I'd say no. Have I called the non-emergency number? I would say yes. And so do we need to add that? Have you contacted law enforcement via 911 or the non-emergency dispatch number somehow, just to be all-inclusive of, and that's a proactive step by the citizen versus, yeah, I got pulled over.
Right. Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, if there's a way to parse that language so that you're inclusive of the different types of proactive contact with law enforcement.
And I'll just speak from the survey team. I think we could use your help, whether it's Mike or Ben or somebody with a little more technical knowledge, to give us the right language. I mean, we can use this, the similar language to 911, but making sure we're using the right technical language to differentiate. If you want to add a question about emergency.
We can send a joint email or back and forth.
Yep.
Okay. Michael?
Eric, the one question I had is the Likert scale that we use throughout the survey. I'm not sure how to handle the neutral response. I mean, if I'm neutral about an interaction I've had versus I don't have an ability to assess that, are we going to take neutral, neither agree nor disagree responses as I've never had an interaction, I can't comment on that element. So is that a 0 or not applicable, or I can't rate this? What's the thought process behind that in the survey design?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think if you go to like professionalism, for example, we definitely included, I have no experience with this. And I would just make the argument that if you feel like there are some other sections where that is a very reasonable answer, or want to give people that option, please do let us know if you feel like there are some areas that, this is one I really am curious about, or I am concerned about, because we do think that there is definitely an option in some cases where that should be a response option.
Yeah, you guys are the experts. I mean, I'm really deferring a lot of the design of this to you guys. If you went through that lens with each one of these and evaluated whether or not to add that, I trust that I do see that there are different sections in here. So as long as you and your team went through and you can say that you guys evaluated whether or not to do that for each question, I'm fine with that.
Well, I appreciate that, and I'm noting that down, Michael, so I'll make sure that we definitely, I think we tried to pay attention to that, but I think, we'll just go through again, give our own best shot. But I would just say to all of you, if you see somewhere you feel, like, I don't get why they didn't ask it here, feel free to, reach out and let us know. But I will definitely make sure we go through that again, Michael.
Are there other comments?
I've got one. The very last question, D15. How many times have you been arrested in the last 12 months? I think that definitely needs the wording changed to maybe cited, or, I mean, something, because we weren't arresting people and taking them to jail, and most people associate arrest with being taken to jail, and we were doing very, very little of that because of COVID.
Yeah, I totally agree, Gene. I think
Should we?
adding, if you, sorry, Eric, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead, no, go ahead, Ben, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, adding both referred to the district attorney's office on criminal charges, so criminally referred, or summonsed, criminally summonsed by the police. I would say adding both of those things, because we're
So Ben-
probably wanting to know more than just, have you been custodially arrested and taken to jail?
So criminally referred or criminally summoned, did I hear that correctly?
Yeah, issued a criminal summons, I would say. Which is essentially a citation you get that orders you into criminal court instead of being taken to jail.
Do we care about like traffic type citations? I'm just thinking of from the point of view of, you know, well, they pulled me over for no reason. Well, you got a ticket for speeding, so obviously you were doing something. I don't know if that's valuable or not.
I was just thinking about that and saying we need to exclude, if we're going to use criminal summons, we need then to say this does not include. Because I think some people are going to think, oh, I got a speeding ticket, and there is a court date on my speeding ticket, but that's different than, you know, so we might, it's very hard. It's sort of, are we looking at the speeders, or are we looking at those individuals who are doing a little bit more than exceeding the limits?
Yeah, my assumption was that D15, that question was trying to get at people who are involved in criminal acts. And then, so I'm not sure what the point of that demographic question is, Eric, if that's trying to get after people who have been, you know, involved criminally with law enforcement, or something beyond that.
I believe that is the intent, right? And, but, you know, I'm very much in need of some technical advice, I think, on this, because, like you said, I wouldn't have known to use the terms criminally referred or issued a criminal summons as being the you know, the differentiator between a criminal act versus a non-criminal. So if that's, I think that the purpose is to find out if that demographic, if you fall into that demographic, have a significantly different opinion about their interactions, for better or worse. I think that's the intent. But if you, but look, ultimately, it's up to you guys if you feel like that's information you want or need.
Well, I think that would be very helpful as we look at and we break the survey down and we look at people who have been arrested, criminally referred, or somehow criminally involved with law enforcement. How are they answering these questions differently from somebody who is simply getting a traffic citation? So I think we want to separate that out, in my opinion.
So if we do that, because those are very technical terms, I would probably side with Mike's comment that maybe we just have a quick parentheses right after that. This does not include, you know, whatever it is that we think people might confuse. Like, what would we call it? Just citations, or is there other things?
Yeah.
What about, have you had an interaction with the police that either required you to appear in court or resulted in a custodial arrest or being taken into custody? That would weed out most of the,
Yeah, except for people get confused because we have municipal
They do.
court for traffic tickets, so.
Right.
I think.
but if we
I think
could
a pa-
exclude citations or,
Yeah, I think a parentheses that says this doesn't include simple traffic violations or traffic citations would clarify that.
So are you getting at those in D14? How often have you been pulled over or stopped by the police? Is that getting at your traffic?
Because, you know, you might not get a citation.
D15 would be then the one with the citation, criminal. So you've got two questions there in a row. How many times have you been pulled over or stopped? And how many times have you been criminally cited or whatever? So does that capture what we want in sort of the differentiation?
I think it does. I mean, you might, if you, how many, I think we want to know how many times we've been pulled over or stopped by police, just generally. I mean, out of that can come a lot of different things. A
Right.
verbal warning, you can get a traffic citation for speeding, you could get criminally arrested for, transporting drugs. I mean, there's a lot of things that could come out of that. But I think that's the lowest level of, officers requiring you to stop and because of a violation of the law of some sort. And then D15 is, okay, now you're at a different level of interaction with law enforcement, which is a criminal arrest or referral.
Ben or Mike, are there other types of, I don't know what to call them, citations beyond traffic citations that we should include in that parentheses that I'm just not aware of?
Well, we do have what's called municipal citations, and that would be for violations of municipal ordinance. So, for example, we can issue a citation for disorderly conduct where you come to municipal court, there's no criminal penalty assigned with that, and that's a different level of disorderly conduct than a criminal violation. But I think that's a relatively small number of citations comparably, so I don't know that we need to parse that deep. But I think that's the only other type of enforcement action that we would take.
Okay, I've added that in my version, so you'll see that in the next iteration. I don't want to, again, hijack if you've got other questions, but I've got another question for all of you. One of the things that came up in the focus group, which I thought was very insightful, it was actually most of the treatment and recovery group that we did. They looked at the timelines for all of these questions, and they said, why 12 months? And I don't even remember why we picked 12 months. And their point was, I had an interaction, with the police 13 months ago, 15 months ago, 24 months ago. And, the personnel over a 2-year period has not changed significantly from 2 years ago. So should we have a different time frame in there? Because essentially we're excluding everyone from answering some of our, I don't know how important they are, but all of those conditional questions are based on 12-month, in the last 12 months. Do we want to expand that, or do you feel comfortable with that 12-month limitation?
I think the intention for the 12-month period is that this is a recurring annual survey. So the 12-month might not be appropriate in the first one, but every year afterwards, the 12 months would be appropriate.
I think especially with the pandemic, we have a skewed reality. I mean, we've had 12 months of people not functioning in a typical manner. But like Ben said, from here out, then to put that, I also don't know, like, how much do people remember if it was 24 months ago, if it was 18 months ago? I mean, you get a gray area. I know that's one of the problems with crime victimization surveys is, in the last X number of months, and was it a year ago, or was it 11 months? So we get this, I mean, we're not going to be perfect on it. I understand the timeline, but I think for sure going forward, we should put 12 months. I don't know from the initial one.
Okay, I think that's helpful. I think just having a rationale is important. So when people ask, that's why. So that's very helpful. Thank you.
Other questions, comments? So you'll make these changes. The work group will meet next Wednesday. Will you be done, do you think, by Wednesday of next week?
Well, we're going to have the next draft of the survey ready hopefully by end of day tomorrow. And what we're hoping then is to give give it back to you guys for another round. And yeah, so if we can get it back, if we get your feedback on this next, the next draft by say Monday or Tuesday, then that would allow us to, be even further ahead for our Monday meeting. So I guess it just depends on if you feel like, if we're able to get this to you, say by end of day tomorrow, how much time would you need to do this on your own to kind of, review it, what we're doing tonight, go through, have questions, comments, et cetera.
Okay. So there's a schedule, and are you comfortable turning around in a couple of days? If you've got it Thursday and get comments in by Monday? It either gets done or it doesn't get done. All right.
That's true. So on our end, April and I, we met right before this for a couple of hours. And we've already made some substantial changes based on some of the, like I said, the comments you've already made, this group's already made, but also from the focus group. So we're already partway there to getting the next draft done. Like I said, we'll try to have that done by end of day tomorrow. So then, yeah, so it's a matter of, do you want to have your comments, or will you be ready to have, your next round of comments done by, say, end of day Monday or end of day Tuesday, something like that?
I think we're shooting by the end of the day Monday. And that would give you time to turn around for the work group, finalize it for the work group, and then we can focus in on how are we getting it out. Does that make sense? Everybody's nodding. Everybody here is
Works.
nodding yes.
Okay, works for us, absolutely. We can have that next version ready by the Wednesday 4 p.m. meeting. Yep.
Good. Anything else on the survey? All right, Eric, thank you and your team for all of your efforts. And
Thank you all, and thanks Chief Blivin especially, and also to the county for Laura Yari for helping us do those focus groups. So thanks a lot.
great.
Okay, take care.
Thank you. You're welcome to stay.
Are you gonna be disappointed if I say I'm gonna go eat my dinner?
Terribly, but go ahead.
Okay.
All right, well, that takes us on to review recommendations from the President's Task Force on 21st Century Policing, the Wisconsin Professional Police Association, and the Speaker's Task Force. All of those documents were included in your packet, as well as a spreadsheet that I pulled together trying to capture all of those recommendations. At the last meeting, we talked about trying to build off of the President's Commissions on 21st Century Policing's pillars, and those pillars are building trust and legitimacy, policy and oversight, technology and social media, community policing and crime reduction, training and education, and officer wellness and safety. And we would look at trying to frame a recommendation. So what we did is began the process of looking at which of those might be applicable to this task force, in which are, a number of the federal recommendations were for the U.S. Department of Justice or others to do creating funding or training programs or working with the FBI, training institutes, et cetera. Those don't have a lot of relevance to us, but I thought we would try to, if we could, lump them and then deal with them, each of the pillars, at one of our meetings coming up. And there's, the building trust and legitimacy, community policing and policy and oversight are probably some that will take more of our time. The issue of officer wellness and safety is, we've talked a little bit about, and there have been some advances in Wisconsin relative to recent legislation. But I think we want to do this. But do you want to take like one or two pillars a meeting just to try to check in? And what we'd ask Ben to do is Ben to look at, in the department, which of these are we doing? And there are several of them that we've already done, body cameras, and I think a lot of the concepts of the training program and the use of force and tracking of those incidents. But begin to look at them and saying, we've done these, we don't need to focus on them. But it would be a good barometer for us at the end when we start talking about developing our recommendations and saying that the department is already ahead of many of the recommendations that are being promoted on the national level, and we've done the following things. And then we can then focus in on what resources do we need to commit to achieving the balance of them. So we sort of have a scorecard, done, not, in progress, needs attention, or not applicable. Does that make sense? Michael?
Yeah, that makes sense as a general approach. I got a question or clarification. On this spreadsheet, there's X's and question marks in a column. Can you explain that, or maybe I missed it?
Well, the X's were, we thought it was appropriate for this group to look at. The question marks are, we probably need to spend some time figuring if that is appropriate. It was just a first blush. If there's nothing there, it's generally, it may be beyond the purview of this task force. So an X is, yes, we should look at it. A question mark means we should discuss whether it's appropriate. And it is, those are draft, very draft.
Yeah. In terms of your process, one of the things I was thinking as you were explaining it is to potentially ask the chief to maybe categorize each of these recommendations as a start, stop, keep doing analysis. I mean, I would assume there's a fair amount of these that we're already doing, so I don't know if it makes sense to actually discuss something that we're currently doing and say that we should stop doing that. I don't think that's a realistic outcome. So if we could have some type of analysis that way where it's, we need to start doing this, or we potentially need to stop doing this, or keep doing it, and then the other category could potentially be not applicable. Like it's, talking about a federal agency and a federal oversight that, doesn't apply. To me, that would expedite your process that you outlined, John.
Yeah, I can certainly do that. I've gone through and I've done a lot of that already. I don't have a working document to provide to you today, but probably by your next meeting I could. I can tell you that the lion's share of these recommendations are already implemented. So there are a handful that we could look at.
I think that's a great summary at the end of the day is we looked at the president's 24th century policing recommendations. We're implementing 78% of those recommendations already today. We think we should implement the other 10%, the other 5% are not applicable. Like, that's a great summary recommendation.
You bet. If you'd like, I'll provide a report for you at the next meeting.
Does that make sense from a process perspective? Are there, and again, then I would defer to you on whether or not you thought some of those, and maybe if you and I could just meet for a few minutes, because I looked at some of the ones that I thought were not applicable, and there are nuances to it that may be worth us just looking at, because it talked about federal dollars to do X, and then the X was of interest. So we might want to just modify or tweak some of those recommendations, even though we're not dealing with a funding issue. So I've gone through and made some changes, and I can share those with you and Jean and others, and we can bring something in at the next meeting. But I think we'll start with, rather than bombarding you with all 6 of the pillars, we'll start with 1 or 2, and then move on. We've got to deal with some of the other issues, follow up on the mental health discussion, some of the other crisis and trauma services in the community going forward. So we can balance it out with going through the recommendations in that. But Michael, I'd like your idea, start, stop, and keep doing, and not applicable. Any questions? All right. Then where are we? We also put in there the spreadsheet that shows our tasks and objectives and actionable items and what we've done to date. We've done a lot of the background information. But the whole issue of identifying underlying social needs, including mental health problems, homelessness, and trauma that bring people into contact with law enforcement. We've had an overview of what we're doing with the homeless. We've had an overview of what we're doing from a mental health problems perspective. We had the brief discussion on that whole issue of child welfare and the social services needs, but do we need to begin to try to quantify what those might be? You know, I think I've heard a number of people say that we need to expand CART beyond a one shift. Do we want to start looking at, now that we've heard about these issues, what would it take as a community to be, to develop best practices? And what would those practices look like? Does it make sense for us to begin to try to do that? And then the question is any volunteers to help us begin to try to identify what those best practices might be? Eventually, we'll probably need to get into, if we've identified them, what sort of resources would it take and what would the cost of those resources be? Ultimately, when we make our recommendations to the city, Police and Fire Commission, and the department. So are there anybody interested? Or maybe Katie, you, Ben, and I can talk and we can figure out how we can capture that. Michael, I know we will be relying on you for some of those crisis services, and, you know, from the perspective of if we're going to continue to work together and develop that, the assessment team, we'd need to know what that would be. And I think we've got, with the work that Matt and the department did with social services, we've got an idea of what that child welfare component might begin to look like. So we can start there. But other people have thoughts? Okay, we'll start there. A lot of the other things are sort of building off of our recommendations. We still we'll be trying to get Chad Billup and somebody from the Sheriff's Department to talk about the jail and you know, how that fits into the system, what the numbers look like there. Are there other data gaps or needs that you see that we need to address as a task force? Other groups that we should be inviting in? Is it worthwhile to ask a Jeff Sargent from United Way? Is it worthwhile to ask Jane Graham-Jennings from the women's community to come in and explain some of their needs?
Yeah, I would say it is, in terms of the organizations that are right there on the ground dealing with folks coming in, like you mentioned, the women's community, domestic violence, and some of those other nonprofits that really function and provide a lot of the services in addition to the police, or have interaction with them because of it.
I would also wonder about school resource officers, and, you know, just their perceptions of what's happening. I think they get a family connection that we sometimes miss, and it's a different sort of element.
So you're identifying that you'd like to hear from the school resource officers? Is that there?
Well, I'm just thinking that, you know, we talk about front line, and, you know, I've interacted with 2 or 3, you know, with my own kids, hypothetically, all in positive ways. It's all about the dogs. It's all about the therapy dogs. But I do think that sometimes, you know, they may have some insights dealing with kids and what the kids are hearing at home and what the kids are growing up with. When we look at, you know, we talk about social learning and we talk about socialization, what are the kids, like, what are they hearing kids talking to them about police?
Sure.
Because that comes from someplace. And that's the next and up-and-coming cohort we're going to have to, you know, we need to be aware of.
Yeah, if it's helpful, maybe I'd recommend, you know, if you want to hear about that, I could ask Lieutenant Nathan Seiler to come. He oversees our our school resource officer program, and he could bring somebody from the school district so they could speak from a school perspective on, the value of having police in the school, what issues may exist with having law enforcement in the school, what issues are resolved by having police in the school. So if that's helpful, I could coordinate that.
And then, Mayor, we had discussed at one time the lacrosse approach that had a heavy community involvement in schools. Is that worthwhile for us to look at?
I feel like we maybe want to investigate how it's going.
I'm not recalling that conversation. I know that, I think lacrosse is actually divesting police from schools.
Okay.
When I talked to the chief there a few months ago,
It
he
seems
said
like it was
that's what the
kind of
school board had decided.
It's kind of a different style of approach.
Different approach? Okay.
Yeah.
All right, well, we have enough to fill our plate for a while. Anything else on our actions, our tasks, objectives for tonight? We'll keep plugging in information as to where we go, and once the survey gets done, we'll have a lot more to work with. All right, future meetings. So our next, when do we want to meet next? I believe our next with the 14th of June work? Is that too far out?
Does this body need to meet before the survey goes out?
No.
Okay.
7th, 14th? Monday?
Is available in here, the 7th would not be available till 7:30.
14th is available?
Correct.
Do we want to look at June 14th? And then, Ben, did you get all the responses, or Jean, for
Oh,
the?
I did. The 7th of June
Oh,
was everybody could make that.
so June 7th we will meet, and that will be the, you said the training? And that's at 6:30
I think we said 5:30.
or 5:30 at 8?
So is that gym shorts, tennis shoes type activity, or what are we talking about here?
Wear comfortable clothing,
Okay,
yes.
all right.
Yeah, I mean, there
Ice.
won't be anything too
Okay.
physical,
Okay.
you won't be doing hands-on, taking people to the ground type maneuvers, but, we definitely, for those that are interested, would put you through use of force scenarios, so. But you could do that in jeans and a polo.
Okay,
No suits. You
no
can-
suits, yeah.
No.
Hey, I'll be happy to shed it. Okay,
So we would meet on the June 7th for training or education. Is the 14th, would the 14th work for a meeting? So both, we would ask 2 Mondays? So let's plan then for 5:30 on the 7th and 6:30 on the 14th. And Jean, can you get those calendars out? Those, because we've got 2 people that aren't here. And again, has everybody done the ride-along that intends to? I strongly encourage we do the ride-alongs. Okay,
And just to be clear, the training is at the police department, right?
Yeah, we would host it there, if that's okay with everybody.
Meet in the community room.
Yeah, I was just looking to see if it's available. Yeah, it should be available. So, the community room at the police department.
okay. Anything else? Anything else? If not, we are adjourned. Thank you all for coming. So I